why don't we? Hello, everybody! Oh my gosh, okay. I have a new webcam, so apologies while I adjust things. But hello, everyone! Welcome back! It's 2026. We are here. We are here for Media of the Month Club. I apologize. I'm going to go ahead and say right out the gate, I apologize up front if I am a little off today.
Grr. No sound. It came back? Oh. Your mic audio went off a bit ago. Heard you say grr. Okay. Okay, right now I'm using my webcam's microphone, so I don't know how good it sounds. It might sound like crap. But for some reason my thing isn't detecting my actual microphone. We heard the grr. Okay, great. Are you hearing me now? Hearing me now? Okay. I'm using my webcam mic, so the sound quality might not be good. I don't know how it's sounding right now. For some reason my software is not detecting my microphone. Oh wait, there it is.
Okay, now we should be good. Can we all hear me? Sound is okay? Just out of curiosity, how does it sound now compared to how it sounded a moment ago? Because now I'm back on my actual microphone versus a moment ago I was using my webcam microphone. But anyway, what I was saying while my microphone wasn't working, we can tell how taking a break has really affected me in terms of live streaming. But I was trying to say I totally relate to all of the okay, we can hear me. Awesome, great. Totally relate to all of the struggling in the chat this month. Sounds better than it did before. Awesome, perfect. Thank you, thank you. Appreciate the feedback. Yeah, it's been a rough month. It's been awesome, perfect. Thank you, Magical. Thank you, Tune. Yeah, it's been a rough month. It's been a crazy month, especially here in the United States, in terms of just what's going on in the news and what's going on with our government and all of the fun, crazy, horrible people that are getting away with horrible things. It's really a rough time right now in the country. It's been a bit of a rough time for me personally as well too. Not really anything like major happening. I think I talked about my cat's like medical stuff on here already? I don't remember. I don't think so, because I think that happened in January, because my cat was basically having some health issues that the vet detected, and so I had to take her to a cat cardiologist, which, yeah, fun times for that. um Taking her to a cat cardiologist was not cheap, but thankfully, all things are good here. We got Kitty paying me a visit right now. She's sticking around just to say hi, but thankfully we're out of the woods. Everything is good. It turned out to be just a physiological issue, meaning that's like just the way that her body is shaped is kind of indicating these potential heart issues, but she doesn't actually have any signs of disease or anything like that. So yeah, it was literally just a health scare. It was literally just like um a potential for something to be worried about, but thankfully everything ended up okay and we are not dealing with any major health issues. So yay, that's all good, but it did cost me a good chunk of change to take her to the cardiologist, and so that took a little bit of time to recover from. And obviously very stressful when you are unsure of what's going on with your pet's health. So that was not fun. And yeah, just kind of been struggling to like get the right amount of sleep and everything, and just been really kind of honestly a little depressed. I also spent a lot of January working on like my desk setup. So I did like a lot of online shopping and a lot of buying stuff, so I also like spent way too much money. But like I think last stream I had the new PC at that point, but I hadn't had everything like kind of set up yet. So I spent a lot of January just like buying like desk stuff and like setting up my PC, which is also why I have a new webcam now. Actually, I didn't want to get a new webcam, but my last webcam just like randomly decided to die on me, so I got a new webcam now. So hopefully the image quality is a little bit better. But yeah, that's all like what's going on with me. So apologies in advance if I like don't quite have my usual energy, or if it takes me a little bit of a moment to kind of get back into the swing of things, just because it's been kind of a rough time. And I also did not get great sleep last night too. My power kept going on and off last night, which was really annoying. And normally I would blame our utilities company. Shout out to PG&E for being the fucking worst, most corrupt and terrible electricity utility company on the planet. And shout out to the worst governor, Gavin Newsom, for enabling them. But they actually had a pretty valid excuse this time. I found out from a coworker that one of the power plant stations got struck by lightning last week, and so I was like, okay, I guess that's an acceptable excuse for why I'm getting my power cut off on and off. But it did keep me up last night, which was kind of annoying, and so I'm a bit tired today. And there's a non-zero chance that my power could go off again this morning. So just a heads up, if I like have to randomly disappear and the stream ends abruptly without notice, that's what happened. So just a heads up that might happen. Yeah, my, like Tom says, my webcam died in the middle of a video call with him, which was really great. Magical says one of my family cats wasn't eating a few months ago, but thankfully he's feeling much better. However, it did cost a lot. Oof. Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that it was stressful, but thankfully I'm glad to hear that things are better. Yeah, having health issues with pets is always really stressful, and so I'm really grateful that I'm at least in a position where I could afford the veterinary care and that everything ended up being okay. So yeah, very grateful for that for sure. Tune says I'm getting by fine in life myself, but since you brought it up, the state of the country is part of what's consistently got me down lately. Yeah, totally. And I've been thinking a lot about the news lately, obviously, just because of everything that's going on. And I have actually been kind of thinking about potentially starting like maybe a weekly live stream or maybe like another every other week live stream, but like an additional live stream where I talk about the news. Just because I feel like it can get really overwhelming to try to digest the news a lot of the time, and it can be hard to always be like thinking critically about like reading the news, you know what I mean? Like sometimes it's really easy to just like turn your brain off and consume the news and like not really think about it, and I think that that does a really big disservice to staying informed. So I've been kind of thinking about it in the back of my head of maybe like we do a news live stream where we like talk about things. And my goal with that really would be like, let's not just be like doomer and look at all the worst news stories and like be angry and cry about it. Like I definitely want that to be a part of it because I don't want to fully ignore the negative emotional part of it that is obviously like hard to process, right? Like when you read all these like really heavy news stories, it can weigh on you emotionally, and it's hard to navigate through the world when you're just sort of like carrying that. So I feel like processing it and talking about it is something that could be helpful, but I don't want that to be the end goal of talking about it, because I feel like if we're just sort of like blowing off steam, then it's like we could talk about it with our friends and stuff. But I feel like if we're going to talk about it in a live stream, like maybe we include some like actionable calls to action and some advice on like what you can do to improve some of these situations, just so that like things don't feel so helpless and we don't feel like so totally powerless. And also maybe throwing in like one or two good news stories in there too, right? Because there are genuinely great things going on in the world. There are genuinely people doing like really good work and like trying to fight the good fight, and I feel like a lot of that work goes unnoticed and goes like unappreciated and unacknowledged. So I want to also acknowledge some of the good that's going on in the world, some of the people who are putting in the work and organizing to fight back against some of these things, because whenever there's like a fascist movement like this, whenever there's like a big um uh I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. I apologize. But whenever there's a big thing that happens like this, there are always going to be people who push back, and there are going to always be smart, kind, generous, optimistic people who see the truth of the thing and are willing to put in the work to take care of the people around them. And those are the people I want to pay attention to and want to support most of all, because I feel like those people get totally no thanks for what they do. So I definitely want to include some of that as well. CTA revolution. Yeah, absolutely, Tom. Yeah, Tune says it's made me hard to feel like I'm being productive, which constantly makes me feel anxious. Yeah, I think like the thing about productivity too, uh, is like you gotta kind of be kind to yourself. You can't expect yourself, and I'm saying this to you guys as much as I'm saying it to myself too, because I'm really bad. I need to take my own advice here. But like I think really the antidote to feeling like I'm not doing enough, feeling like I'm not being productive enough, feeling like I'm not being helpful enough, is really just that radical self-acceptance and that self-kindness that like really acknowledges that like, okay, I'm doing the best I can. We are all just trying to survive in this world with the tools that we have given to us, and we all also have different tools at our disposal, right? We are all different people, we all have different strengths, right? And so like I'm not going to feel bad about some rando Twitter leftists shaming me about like not going and bombing my local like ICE detention center, right? Because that's just not me, that's just not my my strengths, and of course I'm going to support the people who like want to go do that stuff, right? I'm not going to tell people like no, that's bad. I'm not going to finger wag or anything like that. I'm going to absolutely like support the people who want to do that, but that doesn't mean like I personally am going to do that, right? I feel like my role in this is really more of like talking to people and organizing and spreading information, and those are where my strengths lie, and using my voice and using my language and using my intellect, right? um so I think like the first thing is to like acknowledge what tools are at your disposal, acknowledge what your like risk level is, right? Because we're all able and willing to risk ourselves to a certain degree, right? Like I think that if you are a like cis het neurotypical white man who has like very little at risk when you like put yourself out there, I feel like you kind of have a responsibility or an obligation to utilize those tools that are given to you, your privileges, right? Your privileges are part of your tools, to do what you can and play your part and your role, right? And sometimes part of that radical self-acceptance and that self-kindness has to also include some grace, right? It has to also include the fact that like you can't do this 100% of the time. You can't like be denying yourself, peace and joy and pleasure and sanity, right, in sacrifice for making progress. So I think it is a balancing act. I'm saying this again to myself as much as I am saying it to you guys. You got to take care of yourselves. You got to find out what your strengths are. You got to not compare yourself to other people who might have different strengths or different tools at their disposal, and you just got to do your best. You got to do what you can. You got to do what you think is right. No one else can really tell you what is right or wrong. You have to kind of determine that for yourself. And if you're relying on other people to tell you like what's right or wrong all the time, I feel like that affects your own confidence. You know what I mean? Like if you're always relying on depending on what other people are telling you how to assess things, it leaves room for people to take advantage of that too. I feel like it really is important to build up that skill for yourself, to think critically, to know yourself, to understand your limits and boundaries. But that all comes with time, like it's not something that you wake up knowing all of a sudden one day. You got to figure that out kind of trial by error. You got to test the waters. You got to dip your toe in and see what the temperature is like. You know what I mean? So I don't expect anyone to have everything figured out all at once. I certainly don't have anything figured out, if that wasn't absolutely clear already. So yeah, that's my take there. That's my take. Teen says, I'm always aware there's good going on in the world and some reprieve here and there, but a lot of times it feels like band-aids of such a broken beyond repair system. I think like another thing that I also think about too in regards to that, sorry, let me finish reading all your chats, Tune. Something I struggled with across 2025. I always felt like I had to pull weight of like 5 people because of my privilege, and that if I stopped at any point I'd be an asshole. Yeah, definitely I can relate to that feeling. When someone told me I'd have to perform self-care, I'd counter it with, these people are suffering, don't get to choose to relax, neither should I. Yeah, I think I can really relate to that. I think again it just sort of has to, I think a question that I've had to ask myself is, where is that voice coming from? You know what I mean? Like that voice in the back of my head that's like, you're too privileged, you are not doing enough, you don't deserve self-care because other people are suffering, right? Like I noticed that voice sort of like comes from somewhere. It might come from like me reading Twitter discourse and people being like very angry, or even like me like reading the news and actually like seeing people suffering, and then me sort of like making some sort of judgment of like, oh my god, like people are suffering, therefore I don't deserve to not suffer, right? Or something like that. And I think like that is a very natural response for people like us who are like empathetic and like actually care about other people. um it's just not sustainable, you know what I mean? Like it's just not sustainable, and you don't do any favors to other people by burning yourself out and making yourself miserable and doom scrolling all the time. I feel like again that sort of attitude comes from the inability to process the negative emotions, right? Like if you read the news and you feel like crap and you don't know how to actually like process and like let go of that feeling of anguish, you're going to just carry it around with you all the time, right? And you're going to just like let it affect your decision making in these small ways. At least this is kind of like what I've been learning from therapy lately, honestly, too. I've been making a lot of progress in therapy lately too. So, yeah, I feel like understanding where is that like guilt coming from, and if it truly is coming from within you, if it really is coming from a place of like, I am truly feeling for these people and I kind of can understand that I am doing something wrong, maybe that's like a signal, right? Maybe that is a signal that like you need to be doing more. I mean, or need to be doing something different, right? So I think it's really like paying attention to your inner emotions too, and understanding like, okay, is this really coming from like my own heart, or is this coming from me comparing myself to other people, or is this coming from some outside voice who's trying to like shame me into feeling or thinking a certain way, right? So I think like really trying to like sit with yourself and try to understand like where those feelings are coming from is an important first step. No worries about venting at all, Tune. I totally feel you, and like I'm totally like in this headspace too, so no need to apologize at all. I'm totally I relate to you 100%. um yeah, so I'm thinking about potentially starting some news live streams just to like talk about some of this stuff and to spread some awareness and everything too. Magical says, honestly, the hard part is trying to figure out how to help, even though I'm afraid to act and get hurt. Yeah, so like I said, I think one part of it is just sort of assessing your own risk level, right? Like not everyone is gonna be meant to not everyone is gonna be meant to be like on the front lines of like the police riot protests. You know what I mean? Like those, it's just not realistic for to expect everyone to do that, right? There are people out there who are vulnerable. There are people out there who just are at more risk based off of who they are, doing that sort of stuff. But there are things that everyone can do. Everyone can use their voice. Everyone can use their platforms, right? No matter how small you have, whether you have 2 followers or 100,000 followers. I have found that like as small as your audience is, it still makes an impact. It still makes a difference. I think I've told this story on the stream before. The story that I got told as a kid, right? And I'm gonna repeat it now, even though I think I've told it before already. But I've had this story that really ingrained in my head ever since I was a kid. Of imagine there's a man walking along the beach and the tide is coming in, and every time a wave comes up onto the shore and pulls back, it leaves hundreds of starfish on the sand, right? And as this man is walking along the beach, he's noticing these starfish come up onto the sand, and he takes a few steps, bends down, picks up a starfish, tosses it back into the ocean, takes a few more steps, picks up a starfish, tosses it back into the ocean. Meanwhile, though, the tide is continuing on, right? Like the waves are not slowing down. They're not stopping just because this man is walking. So these starfish are still coming up onto the shore, hundreds at a time, right? Hundreds of starfish onto the shore. Meanwhile, this man is just continuing to walk. Every few steps, he picks one up and tosses it back into the ocean. Another man sees this guy doing this and is like, hey, what the hell is your deal? Why are you wasting all this time and effort tossing these starfish back into the ocean when every time you toss like 5 in, 100 more come up onto the shore? Like, what difference are you making by doing this? And the man simply like smiles at the other guy, picks up another starfish and shows it to him and says, it might not make a difference to the shore, but it makes all the difference in the world to this one singular starfish. And then he tosses it back into the ocean. And I really believe that. I really believe that no matter what, we can't change the world all on our own, right? We can't change the universe with individual actions. That's just literally impossible. We can't go against the tide, right? But every minuscule action does have an effect. Every individual action does ripple out into multiple other things that happen after you do that deed. So that's how I like to approach it. I like to think of it as, what do I have at my disposal? What tools do I have? What is within my vicinity that I am able to change? And I think you would also be surprised. I think the people tend to uh undervalue or underestimate how much control they really have on their surroundings, how much influence they really have on the world around them, and they tend to look at that big picture, right? They tend to look at those 100 starfish coming onto the shore and get really despair because of that. And they forget, right? They forget that they do have the ability to bend down, pick up a starfish, and toss it back into the ocean, right? Because they're so overwhelmed with the onslaught of the tide. And I think every once in a while it's normal. It's like totally fine to take a step back, look at the tide, and say, wow, this is such a mess. This is crazy. This is heartbreaking and overwhelming. And every once in a while we do have to acknowledge that. But I think that letting that stop you from trying is a disservice to both you and the world. That's my opinion. Tom says men would rather pick up starfish on the beach instead of going to therapy. It's so true. That's so real. Anyway, I feel like I've been ranting and raving about the world and my life and everything for too long at this point. That's not what today's stream is about. I wanted today to be really lighthearted and somewhat casual, I guess. But so normally I know with these streams so far, up until this point, I have sort of chosen like one property or like one media thing and sort of talked about that more in length, other than December where we did our 2025 wrapped. But for today, something that's been kind of in the back of my head that I've been thinking about is how much I really love stories. You know what I mean? I love storytelling. I love stories. I love human stories. I love the story of humanity. I love the fact that we come from the people before us, like everything that we know today was built with intention and ingenuity and collaboration and speaking through time with generations that came before us that we are building on the shoulders of now. So like I feel really strongly about this, you know what I mean? I feel really passionately about this. I love stories so much. And something that I've also been thinking of, as I've been trying to get more into YouTube, try to get more into writing and all these other things, I realize that like something for me, especially as someone with ADHD, I find it really hard to go all in on just one thing, and that can be really frustrating for someone who like lives in this society today, right? I feel like our society is really rewarding to people who focus on one subject and really become an expert on that subject, right? Like people who like write novels, who like only write novels, and they like are so focused on that one craft that like they are an expert novelist. You know what I mean? Like that person ends up getting rewarded in society. The person who like is an expert filmmaker, right, will like make great films and be known as a great filmmaker. And it's not really like the people who like are interested in multiple things and who like uh are passionate about multiple different mediums. I feel like it's a lot harder for people like me who love multiple different mediums or who might not be like a total expert in like one specific thing. I feel like it's a lot harder for people like me to like get by as an artist, as a creative, because we're not like super focused or super hunkered down on like one specific thing. And it kind of got me thinking of like, okay, but then why? Like, why am I not able to sort of like just pick one thing and like focus on it, right? Like, why can't I just like focus on writing? Or why can't I just like focus on music and like just try my best to become an expert in that one thing and not really like get distracted, quote unquote, right, by like all these other things. And it made me realize that I don't necessarily have a specific passion for one specific medium. Like, I'm not like, oh, I'm so passionate about film, I love film so much, I don't care about anything else. Or like, oh, I'm so passionate about video games and I don't care about anything else. I realize that the thing that I love, like, beneath all of those mediums is the stories that they're telling underneath, right? Like the stories of the characters, the stories of the production that came about, of how they've created that thing, right? Like all of those human stories to me are what make me excited, what make me like passionate, right? What draw me to these things, right? And it got me thinking as well too about how different mediums have different methods and different tools, again talking about tools, different tools at their disposal to convey certain types of stories, convey certain emotions, convey certain themes, convey certain ideas. And it really just got me thinking about how different mediums can be utilized in these different ways to tell different stories. And I just think that that idea is so fascinating and so cool to me, and so like, I don't know, like there's just something about that that just like gets me really like enamored with the creativity of humans. And I feel like, you know, especially these days in the day of AI, I've been really just like romanticizing the creativity of humans and the love and passion and craft and technicality and skill that goes into creating something in a medium that fits with the story that you're trying to convey. Magico says that that's how I feel about TV shows. Also, seeing and hearing behind the scenes details and learning how they make the shows and movies. Yeah, absolutely. So today I kind of wanted to just sort of like casually talk about like different mediums and sort of like why I think certain stories are really effective in those mediums, and what I think like those pros and cons for that medium can offer, and why I think like certain stories are like really meant for certain mediums, you know what I mean? And you know, it's funny, Tom, that you mentioned your joke, you know, I love AI, amazing insects, he's playing Silk Song. But you know, you bring up Silk Song, but Silk Song is like a really perfect example of kind of what I'm talking about, right? Where like it's a story that can really only be conveyed through the medium of video games, you know what I mean? And anyway, I will touch on that as I talk about it, but so for now I wanted to do it as a fun little tier stream. So we are going to do a tier list. Yay! Good old fashioned tier list. I changed up my layout also as well too. I worry that my camera now might be a little small here in the corner, but let me know what you think if you have any feedbacks. Yes, exactly. Loam Tom, exactly what I was thinking of. So I have let me find. I actually haven't loaded these images in yet, but I have these images that I created that just have like a bunch of different types of medias on here. Sorry, my screen is like zoomed in right now because that I'm trying to avoid showing ads on the tier list site. But anyway, I'm gonna download all of these. I have 13, 14. If I'm also missing any, if I am missing any that you think that I definitely need to talk about, like let me know and I'll try to add it in. Otherwise maybe I'll save it for like another time. I'm gonna load these images into the tier list. Load these images into the tier list. Choose my files and get to my downloads. You guys like my song? Okay, great. Now we've got all of our medias in here. I tried my best to kind of go somewhat in chronological order. And you know what I'm also going to do here? I'm also going to adjust these rankings here, because here's the thing is I really love media. I really love stories. I really like genuinely have positive feelings about all of these different media. So I'm going to go ahead and change the curve on this tier list. I'm going to change it to SS as number 1, and then S, A, B, and then C, because I don't think anything is going to be under C tier in my opinion. Okay, So I figured I would kind of sort of go in chronological order for what I think like was invented first. Obviously I didn't really do any research. I just sort of like pulled these out of my head, so I might be a little off here and there. So yeah, forgive me for that. But yeah, here we go. The first thing that we're gonna start with is don't call it SS. Okay, I'll call it SSS. Here we go. SSS plus plus. There we go. Good point, Tom. Thank you for catching that. SSS plus plus plus, not SS. Okay, the first thing I want to start with is illustration, and I do think that it's hard for me to know whether illustration or like oral storytelling came first in the story of humanity. I do have like podcasts and like audio fiction later on in the list here, so I'm not gonna think of like oral storytelling, original version of oral storytelling, as something that I consume on a day-to-day basis, right? Like if I'm listening to an oral story, it's like coming from a YouTube video or a podcast, right? Like these days in 2026. So Tom is the illustrator in the chat, staring at me intently. So again, this is going to be a very personal tier list. This is for me specifically. Your tier list is going to look different from mine. Everyone has their own favorite mediums and their own whatever. I will say for me personally, illustration is probably going to be a little bit lower on the list here, just because for me, I am not necessarily like a visual person. If you put it in C, I'm suing you. Oh no, Tom. Yeah, I just feel like illustration for me is not, it doesn't hit me in the same way. No sound. Oh no. Can you hear me now? Hello? I can see my sound like coming up, so hopefully that means you can hear me. Yeah, Tom says, oh, also I have a new chat function, so I can put your chats on the screen like this. Look at that. Isn't that fun? I got sound, no audio on YouTube. Okay, interesting. Is it just YouTube that doesn't have audio? I can hear you fine? Okay. Magical, maybe it's something on your end. Can someone say that in the chat? Well, I guess, yeah, Tune says I can hear you fine. So, yeah, Magical, maybe it's something on your end. But yeah, I have this cool new chat function now. Isn't that neat? Yeah, so illustration, I feel like for me personally, it doesn't like hit me in the same way as some of these other mediums do. I obviously love illustration, and I love art. I love digital art. I love looking at paintings. I love pixel art as well too, obviously, you know, from my little opening animation. I obviously really love pixel art. I feel like there's some beautiful pixel art illustration that people do these days that is just like outside of games. Okay, cool. Good to hear, Magical. I do genuinely love illustration, and I feel like the craft of illustration too, it's so understated. You know, like people, especially the AI chud bros, right? Like they really think of like illustrators and artists as some sort of like esoteric magical skill that you're just sort of like innately born with. But, you know, I tried to learn how to draw for a little bit over the early pandemic years, and there's a lot that goes into it. It's very, very technical. There's a lot of fundamentals that you need to know. There's a lot of pieces to consider, and it can be as simple and as complicated as you want. There's obviously a lot of really impactful illustrators in the world, a lot of really impactful painters in the world, but for me personally, it's not the medium that like I go out of my way to, for, I don't know. Yeah, it's just not my personal favorite, but I do think that I appreciate the craft, and I appreciate the history as well too. The history of art, obviously, in illustration is immense, right? So yeah, I'm not gonna put it in C tier. I'm gonna go ahead and put it in B tier. That's where it feels that it belongs to me. I would love to hear everyone else's thoughts in the chat too. I'd love to hear if you disagree or agree with me, or if you have any other thoughts as well too. But yeah, we're putting illustration in B tier. Okay, music. Yeah, Tom, I can't believe you're a B tier friend. It's so over. Damn. Yeah, sorry to hear. Music is one of my favorite things in the entire world. I have often said that I believe that music is the closest thing that human beings have to actual magic because, like, what else in the entire world can you engage with that immediately in an instant can make you feel the strongest emotions imaginable, right? Like you can listen to a few notes of a song and start crying, or you can listen to a beat for like 2 seconds and immediately start to like want to wave your hips and dance around, right? Like what other medium can get your body moving in an instant? You know what I mean? I really feel like music is the closest thing that we have to magic in the world. And I love music so deeply. I've listened to music growing up so much. I love the variety in music. I love different genres of music. Obviously, you know, I've talked about Radiohead endlessly on this channel at this point. I love Radiohead's music. It's so like in depth and complex and nuanced in emotion. And especially over the past few years, I've loved discovering new artists, you know, especially over the past year as I've like quit Spotify and started listening to CDs and going to my library to borrow CDs. I've discovered like so many great artists from the past, from history, current artists as well too, of course. I feel like music is also such a powerful like storytelling medium, right? Like I think about all of the autobiographical music I've listened to, all of the uh political music that I've listened to. You know, I feel like there's so much depth and breadth that can be found in music. uh yeah, I'm gonna be so surprised if music isn't an SSS plus 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 tier. Yeah, absolutely. um Magical says, when I was young, I thought I would go into animation. However, I have no talent to draw, but I learned that I like drawing behind the scenes details more than drawing. That's awesome. Yeah, for sure. That's cool. Yeah, Magical says, I have to accept it. I don't want to be an animator. However, I love and appreciate everything animators do. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely agree with that. Yeah, learning how to draw is hard. And if you don't want to put in that effort, right, then it makes total sense. But yeah, Tom says, this is how I feel when I listen to Fruit Salad by the Wiggles. Yeah, when I listen to Fruit Salad by the Wiggles, it just like touches my soul in such a deep, meaningful way. You know what I mean? Toon says, I'm leaning towards being an animation historian. That's cool. Yeah, that's very noble to pursue as well too. Yeah, music obviously going back to the music discussion, something I love and care about so deeply. I also feel like out of all of the mediums I have here, and this is like okay, again, like going with genre, right? Like music can be deeply emotional but also like so funny, right? Like there's like comedic music out there, right? Like you think of like things like the Simpsons theme song, right? That it's like, how is a song that has no words to it like funny? You know what I mean? Like there's so much you could play with in emotions when it comes to music. Another thing that I really love about music that I can honestly say I don't think that this applies to any of the other mediums that I have here. And I'm saying this partly as a joke, but I also kind of mean it. But I feel like there's none of these other things that you could put on during sex to make to make the experience more enjoyable. Like, yes, there's that meme about Netflix and chill or whatever, but like the whole point of Netflix and chill is that like you have it on in the background and you don't pay attention to it. You know what I mean? Like the quality of Netflix shows is to a point that it is meant to be on in the background and for you to not pay attention to. Like that is a very intentional thing through Netflix's creativity decisions. Uh So I feel like music is the only thing that you can have on in the background during sex that's gonna make it actually like better and more fun and more interesting. um I don't know what that is, Tom. What is Freddy got fingered? I don't think I want to put that up on the screen actually. No. Yeah, I love music. I think that it is so powerful, so meaningful, so beautiful, so human as well too. Um yeah, I'm obviously putting music in SSS plus tier. It's the goat. It's the best. I love music. It is my lifeblood. I absolutely can't live without music. I think you know, someone I really hate anyway. Actually, I'm not going to touch on that. That was a tangent. Anyway. Long story short, absolutely love music. Okay, stage plays. I was a theater kid in high school and a little bit in college too. Mostly in high school, I would say though. I think stage plays are the thing about stage plays, right? That some of these other mediums don't have, like stage plays and musicals. The thing that makes it unique is the live in person aspect of it, right? Like that is something that has a certain energy and has a certain value that you can't really get with any of these other mediums. And why I say I think it is a unique and valuable energy, it's really hard to quantify. You know, it's really hard for me to say distinctly, like, this is why seeing a play live in person feels different than even just like watching a recording of a stage play that's been like if a play that's been put on has been like recorded and you watch like that recording, which is a common thing that happens. I still feel like that hits different than seeing a play in person in real life. Like there is a certain vibe and energy in the air when you go see a live production. And there is so much technical craft that goes that goes into that goes into creating a stage play. I know this as well because I actually used to be a techie back in the day. Um, yeah, like the you know, stage managers, the director, assistant director, the props manager, costumes, all that stuff, right? Like there's so much coordination. And like the thing with a live performance too is like it's all happening in real time, right? Like there's the actors like go backstage and there are people like in real time doing costume changes, right? There's like set pieces and lighting and sound moving around in real time, and it creates a certain like energy. It creates a certain experience when you go see that in person. And you know, obviously I think that there are absolutely brilliant stories that have been told through the medium of stage plays. You know, Tom and I just the other day were talking about Shakespeare, and you know, obviously I feel like so many of the stories that we have today, so much of the language that we have today wouldn't even exist without Shakespeare and, you know, playwrights of that time. So I feel pretty comfortable putting stage plays in A tier because I feel like there's a lot to love in stage plays, and that in-person energy. Like I think also too, like I'm a really big fan of stand-up comedy, and I would kind of put comedy, stand-up comedy, and stage plays kind of in this similar category. Because I'm basically considering stage plays as like in-person performance without music, right? Because I have live musicals there as a different one. But stage plays is like an in-person performance on a stage where you're telling a story, right? And that can involve like multiple people um or whatnot, right? Uh yeah, Magical here says, I remember actually going to see Peter Pan play live, even though we had VHS on tape. I could feel more emotions from watching it in live than on a videotape. Yeah, absolutely. And then, Tune Years is like, did you clap for Tink, right? Like, that's sort of the beauty of the stage play, right? Like, you can have that audience interaction and that immediate, like, feedback and that, like, that level of connection, right? That you can't get from watching it through a screen, that you can't get, through visual, right? Like, you have to have that, like, energy in person to have that. Tom, I know how you feel about theater. Yeah, I do acknowledge, I understand, like, I do acknowledge that there is, like, the accessibility aspect of it too, right? Like, obviously going to go see a stage play or a musical is not as easy as just going to the movie theater and seeing a film, or like going to rent a DVD or whatever, right? But I do think that, obviously plays and theater have been around longer than film and television have. So I think that for me, there's a certain level of like respect your elders a little bit that's like kind of plays into it for me, right? Like, I acknowledge that like we wouldn't really have modern storytelling in the way that we had it if we didn't start with in-person storytelling. And I do think that like there is so much value in in-person storytelling that it deserves to be preserved, and it deserves to not get lost. Like, I obviously love film and I love visual and audio storytelling mediums, but I do think that there's something inherently valuable about in-person storytelling and being in the same room as a performer. I think that that has like immense unique value that you can't really get anywhere else. So that's why I put it in A tier. Kind of the same deal with live musicals here. A lot of the things that I said about stage plays, actually pretty much everything I said about stage plays is going to apply to musicals as well too. But why I think that musicals are somewhat different, or like why I wanted to talk about it a little bit separately, is because, I often hear from people who don't necessarily like musicals or who are like not theater people. A very common opinion I hear is, I can't get into musicals because when they start singing, it takes me out of it, right? There's a level of like suspension of disbelief that they are not willing to engage in because when they start singing, it takes them out of it, right? Whatever that means. I personally like find that argument to be a little silly and a little reductive because, it's like when you're watching a film, right? You don't ask yourself, like, why are there cameras following these characters around, right? Or like when you're watching like an animated show, right? You're not asking like, oh, why are all the characters like two-dimensional, right? Like, it's just like not something that people criticize in the same way as I feel like that they do with musicals. Um Tom says that you don't like musicals because they annoy you. That's fair. I feel like, I was a musical theater kid in high school. One of the things that I kind of was taught about musical theater and like why people like sing is like, it's this idea, right? It's like when you have an emotion that is so strong, you speak about it. When you have an emotion that is so strong that it can't be conveyed through words, you can convey it through music. And when you have an emotion that is so strong that you can't even convey it through music, you can convey it through dance, right? You can convey it through movement. And I really feel like musicals have that aspect, that level of emotion, that height, that intensity of emotion that no other medium really has. And like integrating music with dialogue, integrating songs into the acting, right? You do have to suspend your disbelief a little bit. You do have to say like, okay, obviously like normal people when they feel strong emotions don't just start singing, right? But this is a creative storytelling medium. We are trying to convey a feeling here. We are trying to have you empathize with a character that's like going through something. We are trying to what's the word I'm looking for here? I totally lost my train of thought. But you guys get what I'm saying, right? Like there is a uniqueness in conveying emotion through song and dance in a way that I think is so fun and also powerful and unique and valuable. And I absolutely do love musicals. I have been a big fan of musicals all my life. You know, I grew up watching Bollywood films, which are always musicals, right? Like, and like I think that's a lot of people, like people say that about Bollywood films too, right? Like, oh my god, why are they all like singing and dancing all of a sudden? I'm just like, do you not enjoy like whimsy and fun? Like, come on, get over yourselves. You know what I mean? Like I love that, like when emotions get high we start singing and dancing. You know what I mean? I feel like that is such a fun, unique, creative method of conveying a story or an emotion. So I absolutely love musicals. Bollywood is absolutely one of my favorite things on the planet. Yeah, so I'm actually gonna go ahead and put live musicals in S tier. They're going above stage plays because I think that musical aspect to it is like so fun and creative and powerful. You know, obviously, like, you know, taking my love of music, right, and kind of putting it in the average here between stage plays and music, right there in the S tier goes live musicals. I feel like that makes a lot of sense for me. So yeah, that's my opinion. Yeah. Yeah, but Tom at least likes Bollywood, so I will redeem you for that. Magical says that's why I love listening to Two Princes season 3. They're trying to tell a story about how Rupert and Amir are going to have their wedding, and there's a bad force trying to spoil it. Yes, absolutely. Reminding me why hope is important than despair. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. All right. The next thing I have here is poetry. And poetry I have a lot of mixed feelings of because I feel like poetry along with music is very esoteric. You know, it's very emotions based. It's very fluid as well too. You know, there are rules to poetry. There are functions and forms and fundamentals in the same way that there are with any of these mediums, right? Any of these creative pursuits. There's obviously going to be rules and fundamentals when it comes to poetry. But like poetry is so I don't quite know what the word I'm looking for here. Like it's like so ungrounded. It's so it's very much based in emotion, right? Like I think so many of these other mediums focus more on like conveying information that can often have a connotation of emotion to it. But with things like music and things like poetry, I feel like it is such pure distilled emotion. And with poetry, right, like the things that are unique to poetry, you have like the use of language, you have the use of like form and structure. It's also like a visual medium, which is something that is distinct between poetry and music, right? Like a poem, you're going to like sit and read. And I think like what's interesting about things that you sit and read is they sort of exist outside of time, right? Like when you're listening to a song, there's obviously like a timeline that you sort of follow, right? When you listen to when you watch a film, right, there's a runtime. When you listen to a song, it's going to be like 3 to 5 minutes or whatever, right? With a poem, you can sit there and read each individual word for as long as you like, and I think that that is something that is unique to these like visual language mediums like poetry, novels, etc., that does create a unique experience. It does create a different interaction with the language and with the medium, right? Like when you're reading words and you have like the time to sort of like reflect and absorb and think about it and to like let it sink into you in a way that all these other mediums that like have distinct run times like don't really allow you to do. I think that does offer something unique and something interesting that poetry can do that some of these other mediums can't. Yeah, music affects a person more immediately where poetry has to be interpreted through language first. But I think like that act of interpretation is something valuable and unique and interesting to me about poetry. Yeah, and like to your point, like it can't be enjoyed in the same way, but that's like the point with all of these, right? Like none of these are the same. None of these are going to hit every single person exactly the same in different ways, and that's why some people are drawn more towards certain mediums than others, right? Like people are going to be more drawn towards music versus poetry because they are different in these unique ways. Yeah, absolutely. Like that's why we love these things, right? Like we love them because they have their unique strengths and differences. I also want to give like a really quick shout out as well too to one of my poetry professors. His name was Ralph Angel. He unfortunately passed away since I graduated. Um, and I have some of his poetry books actually like on my bookshelf here that I've read, and I think that he was a fantastic poet. But I learned so much in his class. I took poetry. I made sorry I'm stammering. I majored in creative writing when I went to college, and as part of my program, I had to study fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. And when I took my level 1 poetry class, it was very much about learning the fundamentals, learning the rules, learning like what is a line break, how do you use syntax, how do you like whatever, right? Like all these kind of very technical things. And I really did not enjoy that class that much. It was really hard for me to wrap my head around the concepts because, like, with something as emotion based and esoteric as poetry, it was really hard for me to grasp the rules and fundamentals and how that applied. Because also, like, with my workshop classes, and this is kind of a big criticism I have with a lot of these workshop type classes, is we did a lot more writing than reading, which I think, especially when it comes to poetry, does a real disservice. Because I feel like understanding how poetry works, you really have to read poetry to understand uh like some examples of how sentence structure, how line breaks, how syntax, how certain vocabulary can function within the medium of a poem. And it wasn't until I got into my level 2 poetry class with my professor Ralph Angel, who was also one of the few black professors I had at college. Um, and I wanted to acknowledge him, especially because it's Black History Month this month, and it's actually the 100th Black History Month here in the United States, if you didn't know that, which is quite a milestone. But yeah, I just wanted to give a quick shout out to my poetry professor who passed away, Ralph Angel, who was such a big influence on me in college and really taught me that poetry and language has so much room and has so much space to be playful and to be curious and to explore. And yeah, I don't want his memory to be in vain. I really miss him, and I really miss that class. I had so much fun in that class. I learned so much in that class, and he gave me an appreciation for poetry that I would not have today if I did not take that class. He was a fascinating man. He was so fascinating. He was incredibly interesting and had such a crazy life as well too. So yeah, I really wanted to acknowledge him as well. So I'm gonna go ahead and put poetry in A tier. Um, yeah, I think that it took me a while to kind of understand poetry and to kind of like get to this place of appreciating it as an art form. Yeah, so shout out to Ralph Angel, rest in peace. You were a real one. Um, yeah, it was a tough class. It was a tough class, but yeah, I really it took multiple different like approaches to poetry for me for it to really click for me. You know what I mean? All right, graphic novels slash comics. This is a medium that I was very into as a kid. I read a lot of manga when I was a kid, obviously. Being the little weeb kid that I was. I read like Death Note and the Pokemon special mangas were definitely my favorites. And then growing up as I got older, I feel like I just haven't really engaged with comics and graphic novels in the same way. There's obviously some really beautiful masterpieces out there. I know that Tom is a really big fan of Watchmen by Alan Moore, which I actually did start reading, but I never got around to finishing it. But from what I did read, it was like absolutely beautifully crafted and expertly well done. But I also think that like the thing that I think that hurts comics a little bit more in comparison to all these other mediums is sometimes I think that the how do I say this? I don't really let me start off by first saying that like I'm not an expert when it comes to like the comics industry, the publishing world, the way that things get made. I have a friend who like is way more into that and knows a lot more about that than I do. So I'm not going to pretend to be an expert here or anything, but I think like a lot of times because comics have like a lower production cost to something like film or something like anything, excuse me, any of these other mediums, because it is quite a bit easier to create a graphic novel or a comic than it is to create a film or an animated show. I think a lot of times like the quality can kind of suffer with comics. A lot of the times there can be like a lot of like I don't want to like knock people for trying like experimental stuff or like things that they want to tell maybe in a more visual medium like film, but maybe they like don't have the funding for it or they don't have like the backing for it, and so they kind of like compromise and do it as a comic instead. I think like that kind of does it. It's unfair that comics often are like a compromise medium. You know what I mean? I think like there's so there's so many unique aspects to graphic illustration storytelling that I think can often get overlooked because people often see it as more of like this compromise of like, okay, well, I want to tell a visual story, but I don't have the funding or the resources to make it a film or an animated show. So I'm going to do it as a comic instead, right? But that being said, I do think that there can be a lot of power in the visual and illustrative aspects of comics and graphic novels in this kind of storytelling. So definitely think that there's some really great works out there. So I'm gonna go ahead and I think I'm gonna put it in B tier, but above illustration. I think illustration is gonna go behind, because I mean, like, what is graphic novels if not illustration, but with like dialogue, right? You know what I mean? So they're pretty similar in that regard anyway. My monitor is like out right now. It's like not wanting to stay on. Um Tom, you are totally welcome to disagree with me. I'm sure graphic novels would go up higher in your tier list, but yeah, that's where it's gonna land for me. All right, books and novels. Okay, so the thing that I think that I feel like comics communicate time in a different way than illustration does. That is actually very true. Um, that's actually something that I didn't mention. Yeah, because like I actually have a friend who studied art and they majored in sequential art, right? So sequential art obviously includes comics, but also things like storyboards and things like that. So yeah, there is an aspect of time and movement that graphic novels and comics have that illustration doesn't. Yes, totally fair, Tom. Consider the art of panel layout. That is very true. There are aspects of comics that are unique, definitely, for sure. Because someone like one of the original creators of One Punch Man is not a great illustrator, but does have a sense of visual humor and timing and layout. Yeah, absolutely. That is very true. That is something I didn't consider. That's really good point. Audiobooks are gonna fall under audio fiction tune. Yes, definitely. Da, 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 da. I follow a comic artist called Cade and sorry, my monitor. And they have a story called How to Be Human. I think they managed to make Emotional impact of the story, even though they had to face some limits on one website. Oh, interesting. Okay, I'll have to check that out. The brilliance of Watchmen is as much to do with Moore's direction of the panels as it has the writing of the script. Yeah, that's true. That's true. That is very fair. One of the things that I was really impressed when I was like reading Watchmen is like every page is like a shot or like a scene. You know, like if you imagine like a movie and like a scene happening, like a dialogue happening between two characters, and then like cut to the next scene, right? Alan Moore did a really brilliant job in Watchmen of paneling out his pages so that each page is like one scene or like one shot, you know what I mean? And that is something that I think takes skill and craft to do. So yes, that is absolutely an aspect of graphic novels that is unique to that medium that even illustration is not going to have, right? So yes, thank you for pointing that out, Tom. You are absolutely correct there. I feel like I'll like How to Be Human. I will definitely check it out then. Thank you for the recommendation. All right. Anything else to say about graphic novels, guys? I feel like there's a lot of comic lovers out there, so definitely definitely don't want to glaze over it. The first 6 pages of Moore's script of Watchmen were published, and they all go into direct link only the first page. Wow, yeah, that's crazy. That's really cool. Yeah, so obviously for stuff like that, right, it's gonna utilize the medium, right? Like I think that's really what I am, the point that I'm trying to hammer home here is like the things that I think like make these stories great is when they utilize the medium that they are in to its fullest potential, right? Which is why I think like with comics, like it can be often like a disservice when you are like creating comics as that compromise, as like, oh well, I wanted to make a film but I'm gonna settle for a comic instead, right? Versus like when you are creating a story like Watchmen where you're very intentional about using the medium that you're telling the story in to its absolute maximum potential. And I think that Watchmen is kind of like the platonic ideal of graphic novels in a lot of way because it was intended for that medium and it utilizes the functions, right, of paneling, of sequential art, of illustration, you know, and everything that goes into illustration too, right? Like art, style, color, all that stuff, right? Goes into it. And I think that when you're telling a story through that medium and you are intentionally considering the aspects of that medium, I think that that is when the best stories come out, right? And that's why it's also really hard for me to say like, well, I love music more than anything else, right? Or oh, I love film more than anything else, right? Because like different stories are going to convey different things through these different mediums and make different choices based off of the medium that they're telling. So as someone who's just purely like a lover of stories and someone who appreciates when a story utilizes its medium to integrate the themes, the ideas, the emotions that are being conveyed, that is the pinnacle of art to me. You know what I mean? That is like when I find myself loving that story. It has like so it has to do with the medium, of course, but it's a marriage, right? It's a marriage between the story and the medium that makes something truly brilliant, in my opinion. I am getting really annoyed with my monitor here. I'm gonna try to unplug it and re-plug it in real quick. Great. Now my main monitor went off too. Okay, there we go. Okay, hopefully that fixed it. Okay. Um, moving on to just regular books slash novels. So I feel like books slash novels, it again, it has that unique property of language and being away from time in the same way that like poetry does, right? Like you can sit with a book and take as much time or go through it as fast as you want, right? Like it has that audience input in the way that the reader input, right? In the way that a lot of these other mediums don't necessarily have. Like you do have to actively engage with the language in front of you when you're reading a book versus some of these other mediums. And I think that is something that can get taken for granted sometimes. You know, I'm a lover of audiobooks. I fully endorse audiobooks. I, as someone with ADHD who often actually finds it very difficult to read, I often read books through audiobooks. But that being said, I do think that reading a book on a page is fundamentally different. It's a fundamentally different experience than listening to an audiobook. And I'm not trying to say that one is better than the other. I think that there are certain stories though that benefit from being read versus being listened to, right? Like I'm thinking of things like literature, high literature, um, things that uses vocabulary as part of its tool set to convey certain ideas and emotions. I'm going to how did I get ADHDs? I don't know, man. I've been collecting them for a while. um I am gonna call out an author here, and I feel a little bit bad because I like this author as a person, but I want to talk about I feel like we all know who Jeanette McCurdy is, right? We all watched iCarly back in the day, and we all know now that Jeanette McCurdy is writing books. She obviously published her memoir a couple years ago that went super viral. She's the girl who wrote "I'm Glad My Mom Died." That was the memoir that she wrote a couple years ago. And I read that memoir and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really well written. I thought it was really emotional and powerful. You know, obviously she talked a lot about her experience like working at Nickelodeon in a very toxic environment, dealing with eating disorders, dealing with her abusive mom, her abusive family. And so it was a really powerful and um important story, I feel. And like a lot of people read it and it got a lot of critical praise. And I think that's great. She has since come out with a new novel that's actually a fiction novel, and so it's um not nonfiction like her previous work. And I am interested in reading it just because I think that she is a good writer, and I think that the stories that she's trying to tell are interesting. But she said something in an interview lately that just did not sit with me quite the right way. But I was watching an interview with her recently, and she was talking about how she doesn't like books, or she thinks that it's sort of a weakness of writers who use what she calls SAT words, right? Like people who use high vocabulary, people who use like inaccessible language in their novels. She kind of like criticizes those people. She kind of puts that as an indictment. And she's like, well, like, I think, you're not able to connect with readers if you're using language that's inaccessible to them. And I see where she's coming from with that. Tom Tom is a lot more harsh than I am. I see where she's coming from with that. I feel like it really depends, right? It really depends on what is your goal with the story that you're trying to tell, right? If your goal is to reach as many readers as possible, if your goal is mass appeal, you know what I mean? If your goal is, or even if your goal is to tell a story of a character who has simpler language because that is relevant to the story, right? I feel like if you are trying to make that argument, then yes, obviously it makes sense for some books to have simpler language than other books. It also depends on who your audience is, right? Like if you are trying to aim for an audience of like people who are younger or people who like aren't as educated on a certain topic and you're trying to like educate that audience, right? Then like of course you want to use simpler language, right? Like I work in communications, right? Like simple language, like when you're trying to do communications, right? Like when you're trying to do like journalism or convey information to people, yes, you have to use simple language, otherwise people are not going to understand what you're saying. But if you're writing a novel and if there is a certain story, if there's a certain emotion, if there's a certain subject, if there's a certain niche, right? Like you have to have vocabulary in order to intentionally convey the ideas you want to convey, right? Like it's like saying, "Oh, I'm going to write a song, but I only know 4 chords. And it's like, yes, you can write a song with 4 chords. There are thousands of songs out there that use 4 chords, and thousands of songs that have mass appeal that only use 4 chords. But if you tell yourself, like, any song out there that utilizes complex chords, or, you know, anything that's outside of like the standard like 4 to 6 normal chords that you hear in most pop songs, like, if you're gonna call that music like inaccessible or pretentious or what have you, like, I just feel like you're limiting yourself so much to a whole wide breadth of experiences. So I'm a little bit like wary for when I eventually do read Jeanette McCurdy's book. I have it on hold at the library right now, so I'm waiting for my turn to check it out. I'm a little wary about like how I'm gonna feel about it when I actually read it, but I really disagreed with her take there that like high vocabulary is an indictment for a good novel. You know what I mean? I just if your goal for the novel is to be accessible, then yes, obviously you want to use simpler language. But if your goal is to convey a certain story, convey a certain emotion, convey a certain idea, or speak to a certain audience, or explore a subject that requires that vocabulary, right? Like imagine if I tried to like write a book about like trans people and I like didn't know the right terminology for like what trans people's issues are, right? Or like what that topic is. And like if a cis writer is going to come and like start writing about trans issues and be like, oh, like it doesn't matter like the vocabulary I use, like that is like so problematic, you know what I mean? So I really disagreed with her take on that. I feel like that is a real oversimplification on like what makes good or bad art in terms of novels. So all that to say, I feel like the thing that books and novels have to their advantage is the use of vocabulary, right? The vocabulary and sentence structure and paragraph structure, chapter structure, these are all unique tools that can be used to convey certain ideas and stories. Another thing, oh, let me check the chat here before I move on. Yeah, I think clean, lean language is good, absolutely, but I don't think that dumbing down the vocabulary is the answer to that. Yeah, exactly, agreed. Totally agree with that. Winnie the Pooh comes to mind with what you're saying here. It's all purposefully over explained. I don't know if I quite know what you're referring to there. Oasis had a whole career out of 4 chords. Yep. Yeah, and so like it's fine if you want to write simple vocab novels. You just gotta then be okay with having a simple audience who is not really going to grapple with anything too complex. Oasis is fine. Oasis is fine. They have like 1 or 2 decent songs. They're fine. Oh my god. Okay, so yeah, and okay, and one more thing I'll say about books and novels too that I think that is unique to books and novels. It is very difficult, I would say, for most of these mediums. I would say books and novels, poetry, maybe photography, right? Illustration, maybe video essays, right? But all of these mediums, like, I feel like something that is very a strength to books and novels is the fact that a single person can create a book or novel all on their own, right? And why I think that that is something unique, not necessarily better or worse, right? Like obviously something like a movie or a comic or animation, right? It requires collaboration, right? It is very difficult to create something big in those mediums on your own, right? It's possible, but it's not going to be like something great, right? You kind of require collaboration for those kind of mediums. However, with books, it really is one of the few mediums where you can create something great really all on your own. You really don't require the input or muddying of ideas. I mean, obviously, like, you know, writers have editors and have people who give them feedback and whatnot, right? But what I'm trying to say here is that, like, if you have an idea that you don't want to get compromised or don't want to get muddied, or if you have like a story that maybe is like exploring certain themes or certain ideas that are like not, that might be like a bit more taboo or a bit more like whatever, right? Like I think like books offer that space, right, for you to kind of like explore these ideas and stories on your own, away from the input and feedback and judgments, right, of other people influencing your story. And I think like that can be a real strength, because there are people out there who have ideas, who have these really strong voices that like may not have like the resources or the ability to collaborate with people, and they're able to convey these ideas and these stories um through the novel, right? Like, you know, again, since it's Black History Month, that's kind of just been on my mind lately with, you know, I've been thinking of like Langston Hughes, Laura Neil Hurston, Toni Morrison, like these great novelists that have these like powerful stories. Like, you know, I read Beloved back in high school and it was like so crazy. Their Eyes Were Watching God, I read in a college class. You know, these novels, these stories, these ideas, you know, I genuinely don't think that these authors, these writers would have been able to convey these stories through any other medium. And I think that these are such powerful works and such undistilled ideas that come from like a singular mind, right? And there are pros and cons to that, right? There's obviously people out there who maybe should get more input and feedback for their ideas, but I think that that is just something unique to books and novels and some of these other mediums, that you can do it on your own. You don't require that collaboration to create something great and to get your individual ideas out there. I'm sure you did. I'm sure you did, Tom. But yeah, books and novels. I think I'm gonna go ahead and put this in. Uh, I'm like struggling between A and B tier, honestly. I think I'm gonna put it in A tier. Yeah, I'll put it in A tier. Live action film. I wanted to just separate like live action and animation. Like obviously, like there are animated films, and everything for animated films is everything I say here for live action film is going to also apply to animated films. But I think that animation is unique enough that I wanted to have it separate. But for film in general, like live action film, I will admit, for me, I'm not necessarily a film guy. I think that there are certain films that I absolutely love. One of the films that one of the mediums, or one of the stories that I actually wanted to consider for doing as its own stream, and I was even considering it doing for this stream, was the film Sorry to Bother You by Boots Riley, because Boots Riley recently put out a new trailer for his new film that's coming out, and it looks really good, and I'm excited for it. And I have been wanting to talk about that film ever since I watched it, which was a couple years ago at this point. But I think that there are like certain films. I think like there are certain films that really utilize the tools at their disposal when it comes to the visual aspect of filmmaking, right? So there's so many things that are unique to films, right, that these other mediums don't have, right? There's the visual aspect of it. There's cinematography, right? Cinematography is something that is a craft in and of itself that can convey certain ideas, emotions, themes, right? Like I'm thinking of a film like I Saw the TV Glow, right, where the cinematography was so stylized and so intentional to convey these really palpable emotions, right? Like that's the thing with a movie like I Saw the TV Glow, is that like you can't describe with words what a cinematic shot does to you. It just hits you on an emotional level. Like the composition, the lighting, the colors, all of these aspects culminate into an emotional reaction. And you know, as I was watching that movie, it was like such a visceral experience. Every shot gave me a feeling in my chest and my stomach, in my pit of my soul. in a way that I literally can't describe with words. It's literally just something that I can purely feel in my body. And I think that films that utilize that strength of cinematography, of color, of style, I think this is where films really shine for me. You know, I also think about films like Grand Budapest Hotel, right? Where the composition and the colors and the costuming, right? Like all these aspects of it are so stylized to convey a feeling and an idea, right? You know what I mean? Uh yeah, Tom, exactly. That shot of the empty atrium in Grand Budapest Hotel. Ah, and in the end they shot him, so it all went to me. Yeah, absolutely, right? Like that emptiness, right? Like it creates a feeling in you as you watch that. I wonder if that's a reason why actors give it their all in order to make the movies great. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, Grand Budapest Hotel is a fantastic, beautiful film that I absolutely love. Yeah, so I think like the things that film has, but I will say too, like film, the reason for me it's harder for me to kind of like get into it is like it is it's kind of the same thing for me like with short stories, right? Like it just feels like if I'm getting so invested in something and if I'm gonna like feel so much emotion for the story, like, and it's over in like 2 hours, you know what I mean? And it's like, what do I do with my life, right? It's just sort of like I want something that's gonna make me feel something for a really long time, and most films don't have that effect for me, right? Because it's like I watch them for 2 hours and then I kind of like forget about them later. So like that's why for me it's harder personally for me to get into films than it is like TV shows or some of these other mediums, because like it takes a truly spectacular film to really stick with me and to linger with me for a longer period of time past that initial just like viewing, right? So those films that I mentioned, right, those films that I brought up are just a handful of the ones that have stuck with me and have like made me feel things longer than just like the 2.5 hours that I watched them. But it's kind of rare for that to happen to me. And maybe it's just also because I don't really seek out that many films. I don't really like go to the theater that much. I don't really like watch films in my free time. Um, but I will also say that pretty much every film that Tom has shared with me, I have like absolutely loved. And a few of the films that Tom has shared with me have reached that level of like, wow, this might be like one of my favorite things of all time, right? Like I'm thinking about well, I guess a lot of animated films are kind of in that category too, right? But um yeah, I'm totally blanking on some of the examples right now, but Fargo, right? That's an example. Yeah, just like some of these films that I like was unfamiliar with that are just so great. So it also just be my lack of knowledge as well too, that I'm just like not as familiar with as many films as I could be. But it does kind of take something truly unique and spectacular for it to really stick with me, and I just haven't had that experience as often as I've had with some of these other mediums. So with that in mind, I'm gonna put film in A tier. We're gonna put it in A tier. I feel like that's a good place. Yeah, Tom quoting Grand Budapest Hotel here to really hit us home with how great that film is. All right. Photography. Photography I think is such a interesting medium because it is kind of similar to illustration in the sense of like, you know, it's a still static image oftentimes, right? The difference with photography being, right, like you're capturing something in real life versus illustration, you're, you know, conjuring something from your imagination. I think photography, because it is that, I think like photography, often people debate on like how much it's considered art. I think photography is one of these mediums where like it kind of depends, right? Like if I'm just like randomly taking a photo with my camera of like the barcode at the grocery store because I want to like compare prices or something like that, right? Like that photography is not artistic, you know what I mean? But you know, if you are a photographer, which actually my mom is. My mom is a photographer. There is so much technicality and skill that goes into it, right? Like composition, lighting, um subject, color, all these aspects, right? Like go into photography too. And photography, again, because it has that nonfiction element to it, it can be very powerful in conveying stories, and obviously is such an integral part of things like journalism, right? Um, Understanding someone else's reality through photography, I think, is like such a powerful thing, right? Like seeing photos, seeing videos of other people's experiences. um I mentioned that my mom is a photographer, and she does like photography. Well, she doesn't do it as much anymore, but she used to do it more for like these dance performances. So there's like a style of Indian classical dance called Bharatanatyam, where the way that people learn it is that you start learning it when you're a child. You start when you're like 5 years old or 4 or 5 years old, and it takes like so much discipline and so much work, and you practice and you work with a teacher for like 10 years basically. And then when you're a teenager, you graduate and you put on this performance that's like 4 or 5 hours long, where you perform like all these dances that you've learned. And after you put on that performance, you're like considered, you know, like a you've kind of graduated at that point, and after that you're allowed to like start teaching as well too. um so my mom would take photos of these dancers while they performed, and also she would like take photos of them before their performances so that she could create like their brochures and like all that stuff too. But you know, it takes a lot of like skill, especially if you're doing photography for like a live event like that. It takes a lot of intuition to know like, okay, when am I going to hit the button to click, right? And it takes a lot of like experience to build that intuition up as well too. So in terms of like craft, I think that photography is something that requires a lot of like skill and understanding. But at the same time, right, I think it's just one of those things where it's kind of a spectrum, right? There's obviously some photography that's like more artistic. There's some photography that's meant to be like more informational, like that journalism that I was mentioning earlier. And then there's just like some photography that's just kind of meant to be like whatever, right? So um but I love looking at photographs. You know, I think like photographs are so like underappreciated, right? Like my fucking like desktop background changes automatically to a different photograph every once in a while, and I like look at these images and I'm just like, wow, like someone went and like took that photo. That's incredible, you know what I mean? And I think about like nature photography too, right? Like all this sort of stuff, right? It's there's so much to appreciate and love about photography that just sort of like goes unnoticed and gets taken for granted. So with that in mind, I think it's a great and beautiful medium, but might not just be something that I pay attention to as much or think about too often. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'll put photography at the I'll put photography in B tier. I feel like that's fair. Tom here says your message is getting cut off a bit, but what you're saying here is, honestly, I don't even think a person needs to be a photographer to create art. Having trawled through home photography archives, there's a palpable emotion to the amateur capture of intimate moments: birthday candles blown out, family portrait, a curious rock someone found on the beach. That's art to me. Yeah, 100%. Actually, that's a really good point. Well, you know, like I mentioned that, like, oh, I take like random photos to do whatever, but you're so right that these like mundane things too, like, can be romanticized and turned into art, right? I think that actually is kind of a power of photography. That's a really good point, Tom. That unlike some of these other mediums where like you do have to have a certain level of intentionality to them, like photography does have that spontaneity to it where it's like you can just like take a photo in the moment and create a memory, create a piece of art, create a yeah, I don't know. I'm lost my train of thought, but you get what I'm saying. Some of the most powerful photos ever were taken in a moment of utter spontaneity by an amateur. That's so true. You are totally right there. Yeah, I think photography is one of those mediums that helps us appreciate the beauty in the mundane and helps us romanticize those everyday interactions and those spontaneous moments. You know what I mean? I am pro selfie. You know what I mean? I know like there was kind of a big anti-selfie hatred movement that some people ascribe to, where they say like, oh, you're so narcissistic taking photos of yourself or whatever. But I feel like, every human being is unique, and anyone can go take a photo of like the Eiffel Tower or like a random thing or what have you, but only you can take a photo of yourself, right? Like that's a unique thing that only you can do. So I am pro selfie. I think selfies are beautiful and important, and yeah, I will always support people who post selfies. Yeah, definitely the spontaneity is what makes photography unique and powerful. Yeah, you're pro selfie, I'm amateur selfie personally. Yeah, I am all for the selfies. All right, anything else anyone has to say about photography? MLG selfie, what does that mean? Oh, like professional selfie, I get it. Okay, got it. Yes, Major League Gaming. I got it. Thank you. Okay, moving along now to live action television. I think I love television. Television, it might be one of my favorite things also in the history of art and medium. I absolutely love television. I grew up on television. You know, I was plopped in front of the TV as a kid. I was a PBS kid. Shout out to Barney and Arthur and Sesame Street and all those TV shows I watched as a kid. Uh, incredibly impactful and meaningful for me. Television obviously has the unique ability to be in people's homes, right? Like, obviously, that only came about in recent decades, but the fact that we have televisions in our homes and can just turn it on at any time is unique to television. The fact that you can follow a story, you can have a TV show that airs week to week that you keep coming back to, and there's like a routine that builds with that, and a familiarity and a relationship that forms when you engage with something on a regular basis in the way that you do with TV, right? Like, obviously, I've talked about Buffy the Vampire Slayer endlessly on my channel at this point, but I feel like I really look to Buffy as kind of like, for me, the peak of live action television and serialized storytelling, because it was such a perfect marriage between the episodic storytelling of having a complete beginning, middle, and end story in every episode, while also connecting the plots and themes and ideas between episodes and between seasons, right? And like, we're getting this story of a character that follows multiple years of their lives, right? Like, Buffy starts as a sophomore in high school, and then she goes to college, and then she gets a job and like becomes an adult, right? And like, that is a story in a medium that you can only really get in television, that like you can't, like, you can get a life of a story, you can get someone's lifetime story in a movie, but obviously you're going to be skipping over parts, right? Like, you can't convey years of someone's life in 2 hours, but you can convey years of someone's life over the course of seasons of a television show. You know what I mean? And that relationship that you form to those characters by coming back every week, I think, is so powerful and so unique to television. um and obviously, we're kind of, unfortunately, I would say, moving away from that model, right? With like Netflix and just like dropping entire seasons all at once and having you like kind of watch through all of them. But I still think that even with like the binge model that we have nowadays, you're still spending more time, you're still spending more hours with those characters and that story than you are with like a movie or any of these other mediums, right? Like you'd still for the most part have to spend at least a few days with these characters, right? Like if you're watching an entire TV show in one day, like that's insane, right? But like there is this like that time and space aspect to television. Like you go to it and you come away from it, and then you go back to it and you come away from it, that I think like creates this really strong bond that I think is really unique to television. And then of course, you know, television has all these like filmmaking aspects to it too, right? Like we still have cinematography, we still have directing, we still have costuming and lighting and sound design and all these other aspects that film also has too, right? Obviously, I think like television has to create some compromises in ways that film doesn't, due to that like scheduled nature of it too. But with that in mind, it is often said that limitation breeds creativity, right? Like, I think that if you are forced to write a script for an episode that has to come out every week, you do have to sort of like think creatively and think in unique ways, in a way that you don't have to necessarily think when you're writing a film that doesn't have like those tight deadlines in the same way. And even though it can sound like a negative, like, oh, you have to like think of other solutions to meet the deadline, I think that there can be beauty that comes from those ingenuitive solutions. You know what I mean? Like, again, just going back to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, since it's my favorite live action TV show, you know, I think about the fact that season one, which is a great season, I will defend with my life, season one was half a season, right? So the reason why season one was half a season is because this other TV show got like canceled like unexpectedly, and they needed to fill the rest of that time with another show. So they went to Joss Whedon and was like, "Hey, you made this movie. Do you think you can make it as a TV show? We need like half a season or whatever." And he had to just like do it really fast, right? And there's so many like unique, creative, interesting decisions that have been made in season one due to that like time constraint. Like we need to convey this idea in a very short amount of time, and we're going to do that through these unique methods, right? With cinematography, with dialogue, with setting and lighting and all that stuff, right? Like there's so many creative limited choices that they had to make due to the nature of it being like this very quickly produced TV show. But I think that there's some beauty in that. There's some beauty in the messiness. There's some creativity and humanness and artistic value, in my opinion, in that messiness and in that compromise. Uh and again, television is one of those mediums where like you cannot do it alone. It requires collaboration, especially when you are doing it on this deadline. Like you need actors, writers, directors, crew members, all the technicians, right? Like it is absolutely a team effort. And I think that that level of collaboration as well too brings something unique to television that many of these other mediums don't necessarily have. Yeah, Magical says television has changed a lot over the years, especially since live action TV. There was something to look forward to when an episode released, but there's hardly any shows that capture that atmosphere anymore. Parks and Recreation, Modern Family, Abbott Elementary shows how the characters interact with the environment that felt entertaining. Yeah, totally. I think those are all good examples. Um, yeah, I love sitcoms. I'm really sad that like the sitcom seems to also be kind of dying out as well too. I feel like Abbott Elementary is really like the only one that's like kind of going on right now, and I don't watch it, not necessarily because, excuse me, not necessarily because I think it's bad or anything like that. I think it just doesn't necessarily appeal to me. But it is unfortunate that like the sitcom seems to be somewhat disappearing. Um I will say though, I am a little bit biased. I am a big fan of serialized television, right? Like I love episodic television, don't get me wrong. I feel like episodic television has its place, That being said, for me and my ADHD, it really helps if there is some sort of connecting through line that brings me back, right? Like if there's like a plot or a mystery or a character arc that I'm following, that some level of continuity that keeps me coming back to see the progression of things. That to me is what I'm kind of naturally drawn towards when it comes to television. I love episodic television. I feel like it's incredibly important. I think sitcoms are really great, but for me personally, I tend to be more drawn towards those like long-term stories, those serialized uh stories a little bit more than the episodic ones. But I still love episodic television, don't get me wrong. I realized I didn't put video games on this list. Did I forget to put video games? I meant to put video games. If I forgot to put video games, then I just totally forgot. But yeah, I will add that in. That's really embarrassing that I forgot to put video games. I feel like traditional television formats like sitcoms are gradually making a comeback, not in the same way we knew before. Interesting. Yeah, I haven't really seen that too much, but yeah, I'm sure like that's just kind of the nature of television and the way that things have changed, especially with streaming, right? Like you just kind of need to adapt to the changing times. Um wow, I'm actually really embarrassed that I didn't put video games on there. I'm gonna add that in actually. Can't believe I forgot that. Video games. Come on. We're still in the early phase of that comeback, to be clear. That is true. So it remains to be seen exactly how it's gonna all play out. Remains to be seen. Okay. Here we go. Downloads. There we go. Video games is there. Okay. I have to stop off for like 5 minutes. Don't do video games. That part. Okay. Do podcast. Okay. I'll do podcasts next. But first I'm gonna put live action in S tier because I love television. Television is the best. Okay. Yeah. I'll do podcasts next. Podcasts I have very mixed feelings about because there are some podcasts that I absolutely love. I'm a very big fan of podcasts. I'm obviously a little bit more of an audio person than I am a visual person, so I really love listening to podcasts just like as background noise. I think that there's some also sort of like psychosomatic influence that podcasts can have where, I live alone, right? Like I only live with my cat, and so it can be nice sometimes to have a podcast on in the background just to sort of like simulate that feeling of like having a conversation or like having another person around. That sounds like incredibly sad and pathetic when I say it out loud, but I do think that like we all kind of need that sometimes, right? We just like all need to have something on in the background to not feel so alone all the time. And I feel like podcasts really play that role for me. um Magical says, based on some shows I've seen on NBC or ABC, I feel like they're trying too hard to make a connecting audience when they do not as funny as they try to be. Oh, we're talking about sitcoms. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, I haven't really watched too many of those NBC, ABC shows, but I hear what you're saying. So what I think is unique to the medium of podcasts though. Well, okay, first let me say like my kind of downsides with podcasts. So podcasts, I think like they get a bad rap, right? Like there's a lot of like really shitty podcasts out there. There's a lot of like dude bro podcasts. There's a lot of like podcasts where like dudes will just like talk about nothing and think that they deserve to be listened to just because they have a microphone and can talk for long periods of time, right? Like there are lots of people who are unqualified or uninteresting or unentertaining who are making podcasts, and actively making the world worse. I feel like I have to acknowledge that aspect of it too, that there are podcasts out there that are actively doing harm, that are actively like putting really shitty ideas in people's heads. And there's a lot of like right wing and shitty podcasts out there too, right? And I feel like podcasts also get a really bad rap because it can be possible to make a decent podcast with very little effort. You know what I mean? Like if you have like decent microphones, if you're doing a video podcast and you have like some decent cameras as well too, and if you hire someone to be like your camera operator and like your sound mixer or whatever, like the contents of a podcast don't have to be as high quality as some of these other mediums to reach certain audiences due to the nature of it being more like conversational and more casual. So I think that there are a lot of just like low effort podcasts out there that get a lot of undeserved attention. That being said, I do think that there are also some really great, brilliant podcasts out there. I think that there are some people who are doing some really fun, unique stuff with the medium. I've talked about Buffering the Vampire Slayer, one of my favorite podcasts that incorporates like music and jingles and all these other like fun audio creative things. And there's podcasts like um Perfect Person that I listen to that involves like the audience calling in, right? And like having a dialogue with the hosts, right? So like there's all these kind of unique creative things that you can do with the medium of podcasts that I think that are unique to podcasts. And I think like the other thing too that podcasts have that some of these other mediums don't have, right? Is like you kind of like when you release content on like a weekly basis or like a monthly basis, what have you, right? You and especially if it's like a conversational based thing, you start to create a sort of like in language with your audience, right? Like maybe there's like certain catchphrases you use or certain like styles of speaking or like certain like turns of phrase that you use or certain like references that you make, right? And like all of a sudden now you have this sort of like in language that you have like with your audience that um it kind of builds that community aspect of things. You know what I mean? Like if everyone has this sort of like inside joke that they're all in on, or everyone has like this thing that they can reference that everyone in that group can kind of understand, that sort of is like a very powerful way to build community in a way that I think that some of these other mediums don't necessarily have. Like mobilizing a podcast audience, I think is something that is a little bit unique to that medium as well too. Um and I do also genuinely think that there's some podcasts out there that are like so brilliant and so like well researched and well produced and well performed as well too. There's some really great like actual play podcasts out there, like D&D podcasts. Worlds Beyond Number is a fantastic D&D podcast done by Brenly Mulligan, Lou Wilson, Abria Iyengar, and Erika Ishii. That is like so brilliantly beautifully produced. And I'm thinking also about like shows like uh Song Exploder by Rishikesh Hirway that interviews artists and delves into the songwriting craft. Or speaking of songs, right, like Demi Adedwebe's Punch Up the Jam, right? Like he doesn't do that podcast anymore, but it was one of my favorite podcasts back in the day because he would take a song and essentially like do a remix of it and he would punch up the jam. He would like try to make it better, right? And like playing with music is such a fun creative thing that you can do in podcasting that you like can't really do in some of these other mediums. Like podcasts obviously like kind of take the place of like radio these days, right? Like people don't listen to the radio as much anymore and podcasts have sort of like filled that void. um yeah, so I think like all these aspects to it, right, that like make it unique, like that unique bond, engagement, connection that you have with your audience versus some of these other mediums. And also just that idea of playing with audio, whether that's like through music, whether that's through sound design, whether that's like through some sort of like mixing that you do. Like there's just so much you can play with, so much creativity you can have with that. But I have to acknowledge the shitty podcasts out there. I have to acknowledge the true crime podcasts that are out there that I think are actively making the world worse. There's just, and I have to acknowledge the low effort podcasts out there. I have to acknowledge that there's just like so much slop out there in the world of podcasting as well too. So as much as there are podcasts out there that I absolutely love, as much as that there are so many creative things being done within that medium, I think that there's just so much slop and so much trash that's like dragging it down as a medium. This is gonna be the first one that I put in C tier, just because I can't ignore the shitty parts of podcasts too. And unfortunately, that's just the reality of the podcasting world. But I just love podcasts a lot. There's so many that I genuinely do love that it definitely doesn't belong in D or F tier, you know what I mean? But there's enough in there that I think I'm pretty comfortable putting it in C tier. Tom, I know you're being sarcastic. I know you're being sarcastic. You all know what I'm saying. You all know what I'm saying. Anyway, let's talk about animation, okay? Everyone, all my homies love animation. Everyone who has ever watched any second of my channel knows that I love animation. Yes, good point as well too, Tom. Sorry. The oversaturation of podcasts is another reason why I get annoyed with them sometimes. So yeah, definitely going into C tier for that too. Yeah, animation. We all love animation. Animation is obvious. Like, I'm preaching to the choir here. You guys don't need to hear me tell you why animation is great. There are some video podcasts out there too, Magical. Perfect Person is a video podcast that I prefer watching rather than just listening to. So there's definitely some options out there. Yeah, I feel like I don't feel like I have to preach too much about animation. Everyone here knows why I love animation. Obviously there's so much more with imagination and world building and creativity, right, that you can do with animation that you can't do with live action. Right, you can have like fantasy, or you can have like surrealism, or yeah, science fiction, right? Like you can play with genre in a way that immersion, in my opinion, is going to be like a lot more what have you than, you know, maybe watching like a shittily produced live action show with like a crappy set or whatever, right? Like I think like it's so much more easy to immerse yourself in an animated world. And of course, like there's an immense amount of craft that goes into animation, right? Like you all know this already. You don't need me to tell you this. Like obviously someone drawing 24 illustrations per second to create movement, like that is also magical to me, you know? Like the fact that we can have moving images and create a simulation of movement to our eyes, right? It's like an optical illusion in a weird way, but our brains interpret it as a real thing, which I think is also really magical and really powerful. You know what I mean? I love watching them so much that it makes me wish I could be part of their world and experience those adventures. Yeah, absolutely. Like it's so immersive and so engaging in that way. And obviously like animation, right? Like when it utilizes, and this is true for live action film and TV too, right? But like when it utilizes that marriage, right, between visual and audio, that's a thing that's like unique to that medium that can convey a certain emotion, or can evoke a certain emotion. And I think the beauty with animation, right, is that you do have that limitless freedom to create anything and utilize that aspect of illustrative conveyance. I'm not quite getting my words right exactly here, but you can use that to the advantage of conveying a certain story, emotion, theme, right? Like I'm obviously thinking of a film like Wolfwalkers, where the stylized animation between the different parts of the film are meant to convey a certain aspect of the story and character's inner world that literally can't be done in live action, right? Like the sketchy drawing style of that animation, of that art direction, is integral to the way that that story is told. You know, I think about another oh really, too? Do you have some thoughts? Do you have some thoughts on some tunes? um you know, I'm thinking about a film like Millennium Actress, right? That utilizes that surreal you know, blurring between reality and dream, right? In a way that like is so seamless with animation. It's like you are just so in it, right? You can't even like discern it. And like obviously animation, right? Like it doesn't have to just be like all about all these serious emotions, right? Like animation is like rife for comedy. um there's so many creative things that you can do with animation. Yeah, I feel like I really don't have to like preach too much about why I think animation is great, why I think it is just one of the best mediums out there, and obviously just takes an immense amount of skill and craft and intention to pull off. Yeah, I feel very comfortable actually putting animation in SSS tier. I absolutely love animation. Grew up with animation. It has always had a really big impact on me. Um, so many of my favorite stories are animated shows and or animated shows or films. And yeah, I don't need to preach to you all about how great animation is. That's how I feel about Disney live action films. It's hard to capture that same feeling as their animated counterparts. Oh my god, yes. Thank you, Magical, for actually bringing that up. I feel like this is such a perfect demonstration on the real beauty of animation, right? Like there's so much that's lost that these Disney live action remakes are totally missing, right? As compared to their animated counterparts, right? Like there's that famous viral image that went around from the live action Lion King, right, where it like showed the facial expressions, right, of like the two animated lions versus the facial expressions of the lions in the live action remake, and you know, just like totally stoic, emotionless creatures, right? And you lose so much of that emotion and that uh impact when you strip away the animation, right? Like that's such a beautiful demonstration on what's lost when you take away the animated medium of it. I feel like that's such a horrible but apt example on like what I'm trying to talk about here, like why I think animation has these unique aspects to it over live action. Yeah, again, I don't need to preach to the choir here. We all love animation here in this circle. It's one of the best things ever, and I will love it till the day I die. Plain and simple. All right. Talking about audio fiction here. So, yeah, going kind of back to like the podcasts and audiobooks and all that stuff, right? I personally love audio fiction. I think that listening to a lot of books as someone with ADHD again has helped me consume so many stories that I may not have otherwise been able to consume. Listening to audiobooks as a kid kind of like got me into reading. So I owe a lot to audiobooks and audio fiction that you know, made me who I am today, basically. I think that some of the unique things that audio fiction has too is the distinct lack of visuals, right? So you might be thinking like, why is a lack of visuals a strength of audio fiction? And it comes back to the idea of limitation breeds creativity, right? So when you like look at a lot of these like audio fiction podcasts, you'll notice that a lot of them tend to be like horror genre. You know what I mean? Like there's so many of these like independent audio fiction podcasts that you'll listen to that fall into the sort of like supernatural, surreal horror. Like I'm thinking about, you know, like Welcome to Night Vale or oh gosh, what was that one called? It was like the Black Tapes was one. There was one about like a monster that I'm like forgetting right now too. Oh gosh, I was like way into audio fiction like years ago, and I was like listening to a bunch of these podcasts. But the reason why you have so much like horror genre in the audio fiction world is because it's really easy to scare someone by using just audio. It's really easy to create this immersive sound design and let the audience's imagination like fill in the rest of the blanks. Like there's something horrifying about the unknown, right? And so you can utilize that unknown aspect of lacking visuals to your advantage to play around in this genre, like the horror genre within the audio fiction world. And obviously like that's really easy to do with horror. Which is why there are just so many horror audio fiction podcasts out there. Um, but it's possible to do that in different genres too, right? Like utilizing the lack of visuals to stimulate the imagination of the listener can be a lot more powerful a lot of times than just like showing a visual, right? And audio fiction, I think, again, too, has that sort of like compromise aspect to it, like, you know, the similar to what I said about like graphic novels or like or even just like novels or anything like that, where you don't necessarily need to have as many people collaborating and working on something to create an audio fiction story. You can do it a lot on your own, and especially if like you are just doing it as like a narration, right? Then you don't even need like a cast, right? Like you can just do it completely on your own. So that's kind of a strength of audio fiction as well too, is that you can explore these ideas without the compromise or input or feedback from other people. Like you can just purely convey your own ideas without letting anyone stop you, which I think is unique to books and audio fiction. Didn't a radio story about aliens cause so much hysteria that people thought it was real? Yeah, so that's kind of like the history of audio fiction, right? Like with these radio plays that came on back in the day, and people thinking like, oh, is this real and all that stuff, right? But yeah, I think like even just like that history of audio fiction is so fascinating to me, of like the radio play then turning into like the modern day podcast, right? Like I think like that sort of pipeline, that shift is such an interesting, fascinating story to me as well too. So audio fiction to me, I think it's gonna go in A tier. I think it's gonna go at the top of A tier. That's where I feel I'm gonna put it right behind live action films. I think like film, yeah, I feel like that feels fair. Live action film and then audio fiction after that, right? Okay. Anyone else have any thoughts on audio fiction? I will say too, like audio fiction, like I mentioned before, it really got me into reading. I had such a hard time reading books as a kid, and retaining information. Audiobooks really genuinely saved me from like having to read books as a kid. Okay. I'm gonna do video games first, actually. I'll do video essays last. Actually, no, I'll do video games last. I'll do video essays first. Video essays, I think it can be debated, right, whether or not this is a storytelling medium or an art form. I think that this one, along with podcasts, along with um some of these other mediums, right? Like it's a spectrum, right? Like there's some uh video essays suck. Who watches those? Have I watched your video yet, Tom? I watched the first half hour of your video. I have not finished it yet. I'm so sorry. I'm a terrible friend. But if you haven't yet, anyone who's watching this video or this stream right now, please go check out Tom Curmudgeon Media's video on Gravity Rush. It's so good. I'm really enjoying it so far. I know, I'm sorry. I'm a terrible friend. I'm a terrible person. Everyone can throw tomatoes at me. But I'm really enjoying that video so far. It's great. But I feel like obviously I'm biased when it comes to video essays. Uh I love video essays. Obviously, I think that there are some video essays that are like really low effort, really like shitty, and just like don't deserve to be acknowledged as artistic whatsoever. But I think that there's just so many video essays I truly love. I think media analysis has become its own art form in a lot of ways, especially right now. Like, you know, everyone is sort of talking about like this media literary crisis or struggling to critically think about stories. And so I think like the art of interpretation and being able to articulate that interpretation, I think is a skill, and I think is a unique method of conveying ideas, emotions, and story. Um, you know, not to like toot my own horn here, but like my Wolfwalkers video, like the one that Tom so graciously and brilliantly edited, that video to me is like one of my proudest accomplishments. And some of the comments on that video, right, are like so moved by that video, and it makes me feel like so incredible to read some of those comments and see people's feedback on that. No worries, Tune. Thanks for hanging out. See you next time. Um yeah, so I feel like with that video too, like I was saying something unique and I was saying something interesting, and I was tying together these points, maybe not in a way that was like intended by the creators of the film, but in a way that I think brought something unique and worth discussing around the film, right? And I feel like that discussion in and of itself can be considered a worthwhile artistic pursuit. And I will also say that my favorite video essays are the ones that are able to tap into like the emotional side of things for me, right? Like it's not just purely analytical, but they are able to connect the analysis to the emotion, right? They're able to connect the idea to the feeling, and therefore come to a conclusion of why it's important more than just like on an intellectual level, right? Like what does this actually give to you? What is this actually making you feel? And how is it doing that, right? Like I think a lot of great video essays really focus on the what, the why, and the how of how something conveys these emotions to you. And yeah, I I was just about to say this, Tom, as well too. Yeah, video essays absolutely tell a story. Bread Sword is one of my favorite video essays on YouTube, and I was about to just say as well too. I'm pretty comfortable saying that Bread Sword's video about Tintin is like one of my all-time favorite video essays like on the platform. I literally cried so hard watching that video because it like hit me so hard. It was so brilliant, so beautiful. And his thorough research and analysis I think is like so smart and so thoughtful and so sensitive too, so empathetic, right? Like I think like some of the best video essays that I've watched have this level of empathy to them that I think like is something that I really strive to, you know. I like strive to have this idea, this level of curiosity, of empathy, of understanding, of open-mindedness that I think that some of the best video essays demonstrate. And yeah, Bread Sword is a brilliant one. Obviously I really love like some other video essayists too. FD Signifier just dropped a huge video, 4-hour video that he's been working on for years about Tyler Perry that I also only watched a portion of because it's a freaking long video. Sarah Zed, I'm a huge fan of. She's been kind of slowing down on videos lately, but some of her previous work is some of my favorite stuff as well too. Her level of empathy is something that I really admire and strive towards personally as well too. Um, yeah, and of course, like there's so many brilliant like trans video essayists. Lady Emily is someone I really love. Um, you know, and I'm not just talking about the people who like do media analysis as well too, but like, you know, there's obviously like political commentators who make video essays about like real world issues that I think are also very important, right? Like I think like, you know, Magical, you made a comment here like you mostly need someone to tell you a story to understand. I think that like you're not alone in that, right? I think like it's hard, right? I'm not like when I say like oh media analysis or media literacy blah blah blah, like I think a lot of people sometimes utilize that phrase as like a cudgel and sometimes like try to shame people or condescend to people who like might not have the same interpretations of art as them. And while I do acknowledge that there are people out there who make very surface level or very poor judgments or critical thinking or interpretations of things, I also fully disagree with the people who use the words media literacy as a cudgel and shut down any kind of discussion on interpretations that are different from their interpretations, right? Like there are definitely wrong interpretations of art, but that doesn't mean that there's one singular right interpretation, right? And I often get this comment as well too, right? Especially with like my queer analysis and like your fav is trans, right? Like people will say like, "Oh, you're reaching," or "Oh, you're like reading into things too much." And I think that that is such a disservice to how you engage with art if you're like limiting yourself in that way of like, okay, I'm not going to think too deeply about it, or I'm not going to try to connect these ideas or themes or bring my own experiences or ideas to this, right? Like I feel like that's like it's like looking at a painting with one eye closed. You know what I mean? Like you're missing half of the depth if you're not engaging with it in an active way. That's my opinion. So I feel like but it's not something that comes naturally, right? Like being able to critically think about a story, being able to interpret ideas, metaphors, or artistic choices, being able to understand feelings that a piece of art is giving you is not something that a person inherently knows or is born doing, right? So I really value the people who have cultivated that skill and who do take the time to put together these analyses to share those things with other people so that they can like share these ideas and help build other people in trying to empower them to interpret art and make their own conclusions and start thinking about things in more like deep, nuanced, allegorical ways, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. Oh, thank you so much, Magical, that you like my video essays. That means a lot to me. I really I literally have a list in my phone of video essays I want to make, and I just like like I mentioned earlier in the stream, I've been kind of depressed this month, so I like have not really had much motivation to work on it, but I have a lot of video essays that are kind of sitting on the shelf that I really want to work on. And I just need to kind of muster the will to kind of work on them. But seeing your comments like that, Magical, that you like my video essays, that means a lot to me, so that definitely helps motivate me a bit more as well too. Sounds like the fandoms for shows I watched, the Amazing Digital Circus creator got harassed because some commenters said that the creator doesn't understand their characters. Yeah, exactly, right? Like there's some people who think like they have the one true interpretation, and especially if those people are going to the creators of those like shows and stuff and trying to say like, no, my interpretation is the one right one. Like that's just like entitled behavior right there. Like that's just insane to me. Um yeah, I think that anyone who's being inconsiderate or mean to creators needs to get their head out of their ass, honestly. Like those people are really entitled, and like oftentimes those people like don't know or really consider or understand how much work and how much time and intentionality and effort goes into creating something like that, because they've never done it themselves. They've only been consumers. They really don't know what it takes, and so it's very easy for them to criticize if you don't know what it takes, right? Yeah, totally agree with you there. So with all that in mind, I feel pretty comfortable putting video essays in A tier, just because for me personally, I really love them. I obviously have a pretty big bias towards them, um as someone who creates video essays. So yeah, I definitely have a very special place in my heart for video essays. And I didn't put this on the tier list, but I will say like live streams kind of I would say like live streams. I'm not gonna create an image and put live streams on the tier list right now, but I will just briefly mention live streams. I think I would put live streams in B tier, because I feel about live streams pretty in the middle between what I feel about video essays and podcasts. Like I think that live streams have the potential to be very artistic and very creative and really cool and have that interactive aspect to it that podcasts have that community building aspects to it that podcasts and video essays can have. Yeah, so if I were to add live streams onto this list too, I think I would put that in B tier. But I'm not going to do that because I'm getting tired. I want to wrap this up soon. I want to finish off with video games. Video games are one of my favorite things as well too. I feel very comfortable saying that video games are one of my favorite mediums of storytelling of all time because video games have a very unique aspect to them that none of these other mediums have, and that is the player input. None of these other mediums are as interactive and involves the player input as much as video games. And when a story utilizes that unique aspect of video games to its full extent, that is where I feel like some of the most powerful storytelling from video games can come from, right? Like we briefly mentioned Silksong earlier, and Tom has been playing Silksong. I haven't been playing Silksong just because I'm notoriously terrible at platformers, so I would not be able to like get very far in a game like Silksong. But there are aspects of that game, right? Like character interactions, game mechanics, you like taking these platforming challenges, right? That build the world within the game and convey these stories and ideas. Like Tom was telling me that Silksong is very much about like organized religion, right? And uses like this imagery and these quests that you go on, right? These story beats to convey ideas around organized religion. One of my favorite games of all time that I've talked about as well too, and actually Tom has a video on, and it also is a game that Tom introduced me to as well too, Spiritfarer, which is a game about you play as a girl who takes over the river Styx as taking over the boat that ferries people to their deaths. Yeah, if I didn't mention Spiritfarer, I'd probably die. Yeah, Spiritfarer to me is kind of like the platonic ideal for storytelling in video games in a way that directly involves the player's input to convey the story. Excuse me. Video games do have a lot of lore that needs to unlock and understand the story of the games that want to tell. Yeah, exactly. And like video games have that like exploratory aspect to it, right? Like you can't just like sit there and stare at a video game and expect to get the story, right? Like it requires you to actively put in an input to explore around something. And that feeling of exploring, of searching, of discovery, right? That directly involves the player's input is something that is absolutely unique to video games that does not exist in any of these other mediums, which I think is just so powerful. And, you know, I think about games like, you know, Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, where like the main thesis of those stories was exploring, and by utilizing the gameplay of like, oh, you have to explore this land, it feeds into that theme of like exploration and discovery, right? What are some other games that I think like absolutely utilize their mechanics to their full potential? Yeah, Spiritfarer I think is absolutely like the best of the best. I'm like totally blanking on like all my favorite games right now. Oh, Undertale, obviously. Undertale is one of my absolute favorite games of all time, and this one is like absolutely one of those games that requires active player input to fully grasp the themes of the story, right? Like the idea of taking your time to get to know someone, to navigate interactions with people in ways that take more effort than violence but are ultimately more rewarding than violence, right? And like the subversion of typical RPG tropes that would not have been possible if this was not a video game, right? Like the use of like utilizing the save point as like a storytelling mechanic, right? Like that is something that Undertale like did so brilliantly that could not have been possible in like another medium. Tom brings up Wandersong, which is another fantastic game that utilizes that like active input and that player uh interaction to convey that story of like community and bringing people together and wandering, right? Like going to different parts of the world and communicating with different types of people, right? Like those are all the themes of that story that is only possibly done through the player actively going in and exploring those interactions. That must be how video game developers want the gamers to feel when they build and create these games. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that that's why people develop video games over, writing a novel or over creating a film, right? Like there is that interactivity. There is that like level of like as a player, as a video game player, to some extent you are forced to empathize with the protagonist. You're forced to be in that person's shoes, right? Like literally in a lot of ways. And I think like that aspect of it can be really powerful when it comes to conveying ideas. Like, you can say, you can have a film about a trans person and have someone watch it and have someone be like, oh, okay, yeah, I empathize with that character. But if you have a video game about a trans person and you're playing as that character and you're navigating the world and having all these interactions that feel like you're having those interactions, right? Like it just hits you in a different way. And I don't know, I just randomly pulled transness out of my head because I was thinking about like Undertale and Deltarune. I feel like those ones have um transness and othering and feeling out of place in a world that was not meant for you, right? Like all those are very much themes of those games that um are told, are shown, are demonstrated through interactive gameplay, right? With Deltarune in particular, right? There's like a distinct separation between the character in the game versus the player that's inputting and controlling the character, right? So like having that like meta aspect to it really is unique and cool and interesting and fun and creative in a way that I think like game developers think in a way that a lot of these other creatives like don't necessarily, or maybe not don't necessarily think of, but I feel like you really do have to think of video games with that player interactive aspect of it in a way that is unique and different to some of these other mediums. So I am very comfortable putting video games in SSS tier, even though there are some shitty games out there. There are some jank, low effort, low artistic games out there, whatever. But there are some beautiful games out there. There's some powerful games out there. And again, like it's that marriage, right, between visual and audio and player input, right? There's all three of those aspects really are what make video games so unique and so special and so unlike any other experience that you can have in any other medium. I love video games. I'm a gamer, guilty as charged. I absolutely think that video games are art. I will die on this hill. I think that it's such a powerful, unique storytelling medium that people just take for granted because there's this reputation and there's this like precedence of like the gamers or whatever have you, right? Like obviously there's some low effort games out there. There's some games where like the whole point of them is to just like have some pretty flashing colors around and make the players like click on things to show them more ads or whatever, right? Like I don't know, like obviously there's some shitty games out there, but yeah, as far as artistic games go, as far as the games that I value and love that have made such a big impact on me, um I'm very comfortable putting it in SSS plus 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 tier. There's some games that are waiting years to play Kingdom Hearts 4. I will admit I'm not the biggest Kingdom Hearts fan. Um, but yes, I think that definitely there's a lot of anticipation around it. I will say that for sure, for sure. Okay, is there anything else about video games I want to say that I'm kind of missing here? Um we can all have our opinions. We all that I think that's another, like, actually I'm gonna end on this note here. This is a really good point to end up on, right? The thing that makes art so cool and beautiful and amazing to me is that there's just so much of it, right? Like, there's so many different kinds, there's so many different mediums, there's so many different genres, there's so many different, like, themes and stories, and every individual person, um yeah, just as an example, and every individual person has their own tastes, has their own experiences, has their own background, right? Has their own context too, right? Like, I think about this especially in terms of, like, probably more with music than some of these other ones, right? But I think about how, like, people develop their music tastes so subjectively, right? Like, people, like, so much goes into an individual's experience of interpreting and enjoying art, right? Like, there's like the context around it, there's like the memories that are associated with it too, right? Like, people think about, like, music, right? Like, oh, this is like the song of summer of 1999, right? Like, there's a way that it can, like, transport you back into, like, a time and place um that is going to be different and unique to every person, right? So I think that that's also part of the beauty of art, and the differences and the diversity of art, is that different things can appeal to different people, and we don't have to, like, settle or pick and choose for things that might not appeal to us, because those things are going to appeal to other people, and other things are going to appeal to us in different ways, and that's beautiful, right? Like, if we all liked the same thing, if all art was exactly the same, life would be so boring. And that's kind of what fascism wants, right? That's kind of what censorship of art wants, is kind of like to have just one kind of story, and to not pay attention to the diversity of voices that can showcase the beauty of humanity, so I really think that it's so totally fine to not like something, and it's so totally fine to like something that other people don't like, because, like, we're all different, and we all have different tastes, and we all have different experiences that inform our love of something. So yeah, that's kind of, I think a good point to end on, right? Is that there's just so much diversity out there, there's so much creativity out there, there's so many things that appeal to us as individuals based off of our own experiences and tastes and memories and contexts, that yeah, I just think the more the merrier, you know what I mean? I want to see more art, I want to see more great art, I want to see more shitty art, I want to see more gay art, I want to see more trans art, I want to see less AI art, I want to see more human art, I want to see janky art, I want to see messy art, I want to see beautifully, thoughtfully crafted art. I want to see it all. You know what I mean? I want to see the art made by dozens of people. I want to see the art made by one person and get their perspective and empathize with them. I want to see the art made by people that I will never meet in my life. I want to see the art of all my friends. I want to see it all. I want to see as much of it as possible. I want to listen to as much of it as possible. I want to engage with as much of it as possible. This is like what gives me life. You know what I mean? This is like why I'm alive. If I didn't, like, have all this stuff, like, I would be a husk of a person. You know what I mean? And I think, like, for me, that's what it's all about. It's just the thing that gives me life, and the thing that makes me excited, and the thing that shows me the joy and beauty in everyday things. So that's where I'll leave it off for today. Yeah, I guess I like art, just to wrap it up there. um yeah, absolutely. Art, interpretations, how we feel about things that we like or dislike, it's all going to be subjective. So that is truly how I feel. But I will go ahead and wrap it up there. I feel like this is a pretty solid tier list that we got going here. Yeah, I think next month I will probably go back to, just picking one thing and talking about that one thing. This month I just wanted to have something a little bit like more casual, a little bit more conversational, just because I didn't really like have time to put together like an analysis and a big presentation of some kind. But yeah, let me know if you guys like this kind of stuff, if you want to see more of this kind of stuff. I would love to do more like tier lists and this kind of stuff again in the future. This was a lot of fun for me just to kind of like shit around and talk. So yeah. Oh, and I also just wanted to add to, I apologize that I haven't gotten to editing the previous streams yet. I know I kind of said multiple times that I would get to it, but yeah, again, I just like had kind of a rough week and a rough month, so it just didn't happen. But um I will be getting to that in the near future, so just keep your eye out for that. um and let me know as well too if like that news live stream is something that you'd be interested in. I'm thinking like maybe Tuesday evenings is the most likely time that I would be able to do that, if I am going to start doing that. So if there is interest out there, I would love to know so that it can help me figure out what my plans are going to be. And yeah, until then, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Nearly lost it. Managed to renew my love and support of it. Absolutely. That's great. Alrighty, everyone. Thank you all so much for hanging out and for tuning in for this long. I had a blast chatting with you all today. And, thank you for, sticking around even after the break and everything. Really means a lot to me. And yeah, I'll see you all next month. We will figure out what we're talking about and I will post about it on the channel. And until then, stay safe and take care, everyone. And yeah, really, I know I say that every time, but really, I mean it this time. Stay safe, take care of yourselves, don't lose your sanity, keep on keeping on. And yeah, I really appreciate you being here. I'll see you all next time. Take care, everyone. Bye bye.